Hi and welcome back to my channel. This is Barb at Just Be Stamping Paper Crafts, and today I have for you a project created for the Stampin' Symphony blog hop. Our theme for this hop was anything from the new mini catalog, so I selected the Winter Meadow Suite, which has beautiful holiday imagery and sentiments. So let's get started. The Winter Meadow Suite includes this beautiful stamp set as well as matching dies. So I'm starting with a piece of watercolor paper that I'm just adding some clean water to, and then I'm adding some Lost Lagoon ink in a watercolor wash to the back of that watercolor paper, and that's just going to add a really soft, lovely background to my card. I'm doing the exact same process actually for my die cut foliage. So this is a piece of watercolor paper. I'm just temporarily tacking my dies down onto it and running it through my die cut machine. I'm going to do that several times because I know I want to have lots of these pieces to play with when it comes to assembling. In order to make it easier to watercolor my die cuts, I'm leaving them inside the watercolor paper, so they're just sitting inside where they were cut from. I'm adding Lost Lagoon ink in a watercolor wash, adding some pretty Peacock, and then some Moody Mauve as well for the berries to add a little bit of a washed out pink as opposed to a bright red, which doesn't really suit the soft colors I'm going for. So I'm just filling in each one, and I'm going to do that for multiples of those so that I can have lots to play with for the front of my card and also for the inside. In between colors, I am cleaning my aqua painter just by dabbing it onto a paper towel and squeezing some clean water out until all of the existing color disappears. Next, I'm going to splatter some of the ink from my stamping blends just to add some interest to my pieces. So this is basic black, and I'm just flicking the brush tip against the lid to add some black speckles across the entire piece. And I'm also doing the same with my dark Lost Lagoon blend to add a little bit of green there as well. I'm also going to bring back in my watercolor wash background and add the splatters to that as well. So I'm doing the basic black splatter here as well as the dark Lost Lagoon. And then for this base, I'm actually also going to add some white splattered ink. So I have some white pigment ink that I've mixed in, watered down a little bit. I'm going to add that to an acrylic block. And then I'm just going to pick that up with that same aqua painter and flick it the brush of that against the lid of the aqua painter to add some white splatters here also. Just making sure that my aqua painter doesn't have any color left in it before I put it into that white pigment ink, and then I'm splattering that across the watercolor wash background. Now I'm going to create my sentiment, which is from the Magical Meadow stamp set. It says, "May the season of sparkle bring joy and delight." I'm just going to add that to a block and then stamp it into my Memento black ink and add it to a piece of Lost Lagoon cardstock, which I'm then going to die cut. I'm using the smallest rectangle from the Nested Essential Dies and just running that through my die cut machine. And then I'm going to do that same splatter technique on the sentiment label as well. So with my basic black blends, the Lost Lagoon blend, and also the white pigment ink, which will show up much better on the darker green cardstock than it does on the white watercolor washed background. Next, I'm going to prepare my card base, which is a piece of Lost Lagoon cardstock that is 4 inches by 11 inches, scored at 5.5. So that's 1/4 of an inch smaller than normal. And that's because I want my sentiment label to sneak off the side a little bit, but to have it still fit inside a regular envelope. I'm going to add my watercolored piece to a panel of Moody Mauve cardstock. And I'm going to give that a really firm press and hold it for a few seconds just because the watercolor paper has warped a little bit from adding the water, and I want to make sure it has a nice flat adhered surface before I add it to my card base. So I'm pushing firmly down there. I'm going to add some more liquid glue and then add that whole panel onto my Lost Lagoon card base as well. Again, adding some pressure to make sure that it sits as flat as possible and some of that warped piece of the watercolor paper settles down a bit. So firm pressure all the way around, and it's fairly flat at this point. If it was really warped, I could put it under something heavy like a book as well, just to help it flatten out a little bit better. Next, I'm going to decorate my sentiment label. So I'm adding some double-sided tape to the back of my label. And then I have a whole handful of those watercolored delicate die cut pieces that I'm just randomly adding to the back of the sentiment across the top. I'm trimming off anything that sticks out on the bottom, adding a little bit more adhesive as I go, and making sure that it's going to fit nicely on my card front. Now I'm going to add some to the bottom as well, so that I have foliage peeking out from behind that sentiment strip on both the top and the bottom. So I'm adding more foliage and more tape, trimming off any excess so it doesn't get too bulky, but adding a nice mix of 3 different types of foliage watercolored there behind my sentiment. I've also die cut some very sparkly silver glimmer paper, and I'm adding just 3 pieces of foliage that were die cut from that shimmer paper to add a lot of sparkle and shine to this card front. I'm going to add that decorated piece to my card front with some dimensionals. I'm intentionally not going right up to the left edge with my dimensionals because I know that's going to stick over my card base. And now I'm using my grid paper just to help me measure about 1/4 of an inch over to the left so that the sentiment sticks off the side there a little bit and sort of floats on the front of the card. And for just a little bit more bling, I'm going to add my favorite new embellishment. These are Adhesive-Backed sparkle gems. They are so sparkly and beautiful in real life, and I'm just adding 3 of those around my sentiment. So I'm doing the embellishment triangle trick, where you have an odd number of embellishments, hopefully 3, and you spread them out in sort of an uneven triangle that draws the eye to all the different pieces. And so it adds just the perfect amount of shine to this holiday card. For the inside of my card, I'm using a sentiment from the Christmas Classics stamp set that says Tidings of Comfort and Joy. So I'm stamping that in basic black on a white panel for the inside. Then I'm adding a couple of the extra pieces of watercolored foliage that I had left over that I didn't use on the front of my card, just to decorate the inside as well, and then really carries forward the theme to the inside of the card also. So I'm adding just little dabs of liquid glue on some of the wider parts of the foliage. You don't need a lot of glue, and they are very delicate, so it really doesn't take very much to stick those down. Now I'm going to trim that flush with the side of the panel so that it fits nicely on the inside of my card base and looks neat and tidy. So adding some liquid glue to that panel, and then adhering it to the inside of the Lost Lagoon card base with just an even border all the way around. And so here we have our final product, a beautiful watercolored front, all that fun watercolored foliage that matches the color scheme and really leads to a soft and sparkly holiday card. Thanks so much for joining me today. Be sure to head to my blog to follow along on the hop and see what the rest of the Stampin' Symphony team has for you. Happy crafting!